Well, hi folks, and welcome to episode 173 of Retro Power Uncut. And there's an enormous amount to cover this week, and Cal is on sort of holiday. He's kind of been half on holiday, and I think he's actually at Retromobile in Paris. If he has managed to get through the various French farmers' blockade, then he should be at Retromobile in Paris. And so I'm going to try and cover everything and probably forget most of it. So you'll see probably more than the usual level of cuts in the uncut. Maybe not, we'll see. We'll see how we go. We're going to start with a new project. It has arrived, and here we are. Those who follow us on social media will have already noticed the preamble to this going on in the background, but we have our new project here, Reliant Scimitar SE5. And it has been parked for some time, as can be seen by the condition of it. In the background, we've got Luke, aka Jean-Claude Scandam, who is currently doing the scan work on this, just to get us the outer shape, the initial outer shape, and to give us a reference scan that we can then add various further scans into as we go, because we're going to need most of the car digitally at some point or other during the process. Initially, we need the outer shape so that George or Luke or both, probably George for the major part of it, can start carrying out the body modifications in CAD so that we can generate a render so that we can then start liaising back and forth with the customer on the actual final shape of the car. We're going to be pretty sympathetic to the shape of the original because actually we quite like them. I think quite a few people do. Not everybody here did, but I actually really quite like them. I think they're a very good shape. Once you strip off all the moss and all the bits of rubbish and big chrome bumpers and things that don't look all that great, the actual fundamental shape's quite a nice car. So we're going to try and emphasise that rather than detract from that in the modifications, but we are widening it a bit. We're doing quite comprehensive, we're making a lot of changes to the car. There's a lot being done. There's a bit of history with this car. It's a family-owned car, and I believe it's been owned by the family from new. I'll have to confirm that in a future episode. But certainly, it's been owned from nearly new, if not from new, and it's been sat, I believe, more or less unused for about 30 years. The car was actually covered on Johnny Smith's Late Break Show channel in a barn find episode on that, and it's got an interesting history to it, where a lot of it is not going to be remaining. Most of it will be gone in its final iteration. There's a lot going to be changed. But the highlights, I guess, are an upgraded chassis, shall we say. You'll have to see that evolve. There's a lot of modification to the suspension going to take place. It will basically be a double wishbone all-round suspension setup. Well, that's currently the plan anyway on the car. Significant reinforcement of the chassis in order to do that. And different engine and gearbox, but with a serious nod to the original. And I don't know if anybody's picked it up online. We wanted to keep it a V6. The temptation is V8. We wanted to keep it a V6 because it's a nod to the original. And we wanted to keep it a V6 that kind of was in keeping with the period of the car. And the idea, and I've also always wanted to put one of these in a car, and I've never had the opportunity before. And actually, those in the Scimitar world will be aware of this having been done before, but it's having the engine plan is a Cosworth GAA, a V6, which to anybody in the know is just an absolutely incredible piece of motoring history and an engine. Just an incredible engine. The Rick Wood Motorsport in Stockport build those engines for various touring car Capris, and Rick can actually build one of those engines as an all-new engine with a new nodular iron cast block, and new cast aluminium heads, and basically all components new, all steel internals, etc., dry sumped. So that's the engine that's going in. The engine plan is new build, Rick Wood built Cosworth GAA. Currently Getrag 265 transmission, though that's still up for, there's some discussion still going on that. And then, yeah, independent front and rear ends. And the body, once our modifications are modelled, will be 100% carbon fibre. It will be a carbon fibre complete tub. So moulds will be taken from, the current plan will be to modify, to create the add-ons that we need to do to this body to raise the profiles in the areas that need to be added on to the original fiberglass. We'll then cut those in foam on a CNC router, possibly ours, possibly not. We'll elaborate on that a bit later in the video. Bond those on, and then fiberglass and filler out from that to basically get us to the shape that we want to end up with, which will match, which we can do profiles from our CAD to ensure that we're faithful to the CAD. Once we've got that shape modelled onto this body tub, then moulds will be taken from this body tub to do the final carbon fibre parts. So that's the loose process route. There's a lot of changes that may occur further down the line, but the loose sort of route that the car is going down is sort of reasonably summarised there. You'll have to see how that journey goes, but they're the headline parts of the project. So we're incredibly excited about doing this project. I certainly am extremely excited about it. It's just a car. I've always liked these. I've always had a soft spot for SE5 Scimitars. I know there are many skeptics of these cars, but I actually really like them. I've always kind of wanted one, but I've never actually found one that was in decent enough condition to buy, to be honest, and I've never really had the money to be able to do one properly for myself. And interestingly, Rich, who worked for us, who finished at Christmas, but Rich, who worked for us, is actually building one of these himself as well. So it kind of ties in quite nicely there. So yeah, we're really excited about this one. Jamie's actually just given me a little prompt there because I'd forgotten something. When the car arrived yesterday, we dragged it in. Everything was seized on it from the point of view of moving it, but we wanted to get the bonnet open. A, so we can do some scanning in there. B, so we can get the VIN plates recorded and removed, so that we've got them safe away from the car, so they don't get thrown away at some point during the work. And we just wanted to sort of have a look in the engine bay, and the owner had made us aware that the bonnet was seized down, and we just thought, yeah, usual cable issue. So set to. It's the hardest to open bonnet I've ever had to deal with. Matt and I were working on this yesterday afternoon trying to get in there, and I think it took us, well, it took us about an hour and a half to get in. It took us about an hour and a half to get the bonnet open. Took the headlights out and the front grille out, which gave us some sort of keyhole access in there. And the two plates of the bonnet catch, which are plates that slide over each other with a pull cable on, had seized solid together. So even though we'd undone the bolts to actually hold the catch mechanism together, the plates have completely welded themselves together through corrosion. So despite trying to get chisels between them, we couldn't actually separate the plates. The catch has basically made itself into one piece. In the end, we managed to, by loosening that, we could loosen the whole mechanism enough to raise the bonnet enough to get to the pin, and then we've air sawed through the pin, which is the only way we managed to actually get the bonnet open at all, because the mechanism is fossilised into one solid piece. I've never seen two pieces of steel become one through corrosion, as well as the two plates on the bonnet catch on this car. It's quite remarkable, but we got in there in the end, and there's actually an unseized Essex V6 in there. It is not seized, it still turns over amazingly, which shocked us all. We assumed that would be seized solid, but it's not. So yeah, it's a project we're very enthusiastic about. So moving on from that, we're going to squeeze through here past the scanning laptop and come and have a look at the Interceptor, where both Stu and Matt and Tom have all done a bit on that this week. Tom, just a tiny bit of finishing off just the very last little bits on the door. He still had to just get a bit more crown into the centre of that door skin, which he finished off on Monday morning, then got the door hung on the car and reasonably aligned. Matt will probably finalise and do a bit more tweaking on the alignment when he comes that far along to do the lead work around the door shut that side. But it's the doors are on. The door shapes are there, pretty happy with that. So that was Tom sort of signed off on the doors. And Stu, while Tom was doing that, Stu started having a look at the air intake arrangement. There's various bits of work been going on in the engine bay. Stu had finished off the engine mounts, which we talked about last week. So they're all done and in. There's a modification we need to make to the exhaust manifold on the offside, just to get some better clearance on the engine mount. That's not a problem. We're going to address that in due course. But in the meantime, one of the other areas of significance that we needed to tackle was the air intake for the engine, and where to put what will need to be a substantially sized air filter. In order to size that, I've just had a look. We had a look at what original fitments the engine had and what size filters were used on the original fitments, and we got a filter area from that. And then we started looking at areas, parts of the car where we could fit a filter of that area, and we'd originally just sort of surmised we were probably going to use a K&N type, a cotton gauze type cone filter in some sort of water resistant enclosure with an air intaking air from a cool spot. Quickly became obvious there's not really a very nice place to put that structure anywhere in the engine bay, because all of the engine bay where we could site that filter would be in the directly blown air coming straight off the back of the hot radiator, which on the move actually isn't really such a problem as long as the air being fed into the filter is not being fed from that area. As long as that's being intaked from ahead of the radiator, then that's not really a problem. The cold air going through into the filter will mean that the heat input to the outer casing of the airbox would be negligible. However, in traffic, the airbox will get cooked by the radiator and the air intake temperatures will rise dramatically, and it's just something we don't really like to do if we can avoid it. So we've been looking at places where we could filter and intake the air without having all that in the engine bay. And one of the areas where we've got some spare space is in the front corners below the headlights. And actually we can get the suitable area of filter in as a flat panel filter in the front of the underside of the wing, between the inner wing and the outer wing, ahead of the wheel on the near side. So Stu's done some cardboard aided design in there, just working out what we can and can't get in the space, whether it's possible to fit it and remove it without it catching on things, whether we've got room to get a suitable air intake, because we can't intake the air directly from down here. We want to intake the air down here, but obviously we can't just intake that straight into a filter, otherwise we'll flood the filter if the car drives through standing water. So we need to have a water separation set up in there, i.e. the air needs to be taken through a convoluted enough route that we give the water the opportunity to drop out of the airstream. So we need to make sure we've got room for that convoluted route, so to speak, and we also needed to make sure we've got room to get the air out of the filter into the engine bay to feed it to the throttle body. All of that needs to clear the wheel and not get damaged by stones. So we're juggling a few things there, but we think we've got a shape that works, fits in the space, is serviceable, and can be protected from stones, and can separate water from the air before it hits the filter. And then what we've done is, from those rough dimensions and rough cardboard model, Luke has modelled up an approximation, and it is an approximation at the moment, of the airbox. Next week I'm going to go a bit more into that, work out how we're going to protect it properly from stones, because I don't want to damage the engine side of that airbox, because obviously if any damage happens to that, it'll be sucked into the engine. So we've got to be very careful about protecting that, making sure that's safe. But we also still need to be able to service the air filter readily. It's a service part, it needs to be done pretty simply. It's take the car to a garage, it needs to be easy to service. And we also need to be able to make the airbox using not too expensive a means. My current thinking was to do the airbox in carbon fibre using a fiberglass mould taken from a 3D printed book. We can just about fit the component parts of that on our big 3D printer. So I think we'll be able to make it that way, but I want to just go through that a little bit on. I've got a clear path on Monday to think through a few things. We'll revisit that and get into the detail of that a bit more then. Moving on from that, Stu started having a look at the doors and the door frames. You may recall from previous episodes we hadn't got the door glass. Well, we've now got the door glass. That's been picked up. So Stu could then start to adjust the door frames to the door glass, which I believe has kind of gone okay. But the caveat to that is that he also then needs to be able to fit the lift motors to the door glass to be able to hold the door glass up and make sure that they work. And there was immediately an issue there, which he hit, which was that one of the door motors, the driver's stripped in it. And our usual default response on an old car like this, where electric windows were a pretty new thing, is to throw away the mechanism and fit a modern one, because they're usually more reliable and just better and cheaper, and everything's better about just using a modern one. However, on looking at the motors and on testing the actual motors, they work. They seem pretty robustly engineered actually, and everything looks quite good on the motors. And then it became evident that there's like an overload clutch in the drive gear for the motors, between the motor and the lift quadrant on the glass lift mechanism, and that sort of overload sprocket, if you like, for want of a better term, had broken up on one of these. And strangely, having a quick look on eBay, it became obvious that you can actually buy an upgraded version of that gear, which has a better overload mechanism inside it and doesn't look like it's going to immediately break into a million pieces, and are reasonably priced. So actually, rather than re-engineer the lift mechanisms to a more modern motor, we've elected to keep these motors, given that they work, the bearings sound fine in them, they work very smoothly, and they lift, and they have ample force. We decided to stick with the motors we've already got and fit the new gears into them. So we've done that, Stu's done that, and now we've got 2 working lift mechanisms, and now he's working on actually getting those bolted into the door, because amongst the various things, due to previous work on the car, there are a number of parts missing. So we're having to, there are a couple of brackets, not major parts, but just small brackets, which by the time we've gone through, tried to find them, then sourced them, they're as easy to just make the brackets. They're little tiny brackets. So Stu's just making up a couple of the brackets that retain the window mechanisms within the doors. Once he's done that, he can do the very final fit on the door frames, check they're fitting the body okay, and that will coincide quite nicely with when Matt gets round to that area in terms of lead work on the body. So that's all working well. In terms of lead work on the body, Matt is doing a tremendous job around here. You remember last week we talked about the tailgate and it being rubbish, basically, it being a pretty disastrous fit on the car and pretty horrible piece of metalwork. Well, as you can now see, it now fits, due in no small part to an enormous amount of lead and a lot of lead shaping that Matt's done. And I think I mentioned last week, I can't remember whether it was on the video or not, but Matt's welded this side of the tailgate forward here, leaded the car back here. Obviously you can see there the scope, the sort of quantity we're talking about here of the adjustments that are being made. There's more adjustments got to be done. He's drawn the line at the gutter basically, and he's working from that gutter round to that gutter. Probably the trickiest bit being this line here, which as you can see is not finished at the moment. He's filed the outer face, and he's then got to file the shut face of all of that. But while doing that, got to regulate the gap, the vertical gap to the tailgate, but also the visible edge in that direction, because that's going to really stand out if that's not right. So it's actually a really tricky operation, playing with various levels to make sure that the lines all look correct once everything's assembled. So yeah, progressing really well, but it's quite a challenge. There's quite a lot to go. I mean, you get the idea. If you peer down there, Matt's pretty good at not putting an excessive amount of lead into the panel. He's paddled all that using the wooden paddles, which I've talked about the process of leading before, so I'm not going to go into all the detail. But he's paddled that lead to a position where there's not a vast excess left on the panel, but because of the sheer area, you end up with a lot of filings. Obviously, these will all be cleared up, all be swept up at the end of the day, and then we'll remelt that lot. That lot. One of the jobs on the back burner, literally, if you'll pardon the pun, is probably next week now, outside, out in the fresh air and with a mask on and all the rest. A chunk of this lead will be, because we've probably got 25 kilos of lead that need melting down, so Matt's going to do a big meltdown and recast a load of this lead back to bars so that we can reuse all the filings. But yeah, that's the situation with Interceptor. We're moving forward, and the body lines are starting to look really, really good from a position where, on initial inspection, they didn't look horrific because the car was covered in a semi-matte epoxy primer finish. It was only once you actually take that epoxy primer off and start to inspect in detail, you realise just how bad a lot of the shut lines were on the car. And now they're actually really starting to come together and look really good. So that's where we are on Interceptor. Have another swig of coffee, and we'll walk around here and have a look at the Allegro. Bobby's been working on this, and keen-eyed will notice the brown tinge on the roof. This is actually the other Allegro, the one that in last week's episode was actually in our blast room where Sam had been seam brazing it. And now Bobby's done a quick change on Monday, and the running gear, he finished dropping the running gear out of the first Allegro on Monday and dropped all that onto the floor, got that one onto the rotisserie over there so that the metal repair can be completed on that. And then on Tuesday morning, I think, stuck all the running gear into this one so that he could get on with the final parts of the mock-up on this one. We wanted to mock this car up anyway from various points of view, but also we wanted to do the AC lines and not be in the way of the metalwork that needs to be done on that car. So he's actually doing the AC lines on this car. Now, I mentioned last week about the swage blocks and the tools that Bobby's doing. I think he's doing some bits in the background on that. I've not seen that, but I think Bobby's doing some little work at home in the evenings of drawing up the parts for the tool to enable us to swage those lines. But in the meantime, we can actually make the lines and bend the lines up with over-length ends that we can then trim to length and then swage in the new swaging machine once we've built it. So to that end, he's worked out all the routing of the lines, and because we're doing the hard lines, it means that we basically need a flexi at each end of the hard lines, or actually possibly only at one end of the hard lines, depending on which one we're talking about. And the rest is a hard line. There's a good example in place here, right in front of us now, which is one of the high pressure lines, judging by the size of it. It's a number 6 line, 3/8 inch line. Interestingly, Bobby wanted to put the 5/8 and 3/8 lines in one set of clips. Now, Stauf undoubtedly do make. We use Stauf clamps in all of our builds. We've probably mentioned that before, so I don't need to talk about it too much. But we use Stauf Light Series, LN series clamps to hold lines into most of our cars. These are a polyamide nylon, black nylon clip made by Stauf. They're very reasonably priced, available off the shelf. Stauf are great companies to deal with. We use them all over the place. However, A, I don't know if they do one of these clips. They probably do if I look in their catalogue. But B, the unequal line size clips, there are two factors we haven't used them in this sense. A, I'll have to put a special order in for what would amount to 6 clips. At that point, that becomes not really a very economic way of doing things because I'm paying for delivery of 6 clips from Germany. And secondly, the light series, these clips are arranged into ranges of size ranges, and there are 4 different groups of size range. And the clips, the main structure of the clip grows between each size range. And we want to use these group 2 size range clamps, which are this size. The maximum diameter that the group 2 size clamps can accommodate is, I believe, around 1/2 inch. It doesn't go up to 5/8 of an inch. I think it might go to 14 millimeters off the top of my head. But we wanted a more compact clamp because the next size range up is quite a bit. The group 3 clamps are quite a bit bigger. So what we've done, now we have our Bamboo Lab Carbon X1 printer, is Luke's just quickly whizzed up a drawing and quickly whizzed up some clamps of our own, which will do the same job with the unequal size holes. I'm not holding that very well because it's not going to bolt through it, but with the unequal size holes, we're actually going to just increase this by 1 more millimetre, just to give us a bit more wall thickness, but they are incredibly strong. I mean, that is all the force I can apply to that clamp and there is no movement. These are a carbon dust, effectively, very short strand carbon fibre reinforced polyamide nylon clamp. The Carbon X1 Bamboo Lab printer will print nylon filament directly and literally no setup on the printer. You just select that filament, say go, and it prints it. There's no fiddling around tuning of the process, it just does it. And they're incredibly strong. So we printed our own clamps. I'm going off on a wild tangent as I always do, but we printed our own clamps just because of the reasons I've just explained. Bobby's making the hard lines, so as you can see, these are the sort of things he's coming up with. It's quite a nice unit once it's all done. Obviously we'll clean all that up and get it all finished nicely before they're fitted in the car. Now he's got the over-length ends. We can trim these to the exact length and swage them when we've got the final installation. We've got enough straight on the end of each line. He's planning the route so that we've got enough straight on the end of each line to get the swages on after the event, after they're done. And he's also duplicating the lines. Each line he makes for this car, he's making 2, so that we've got the spare one for the other car. We use Flex for all our fittings. Another really good company to deal with. Keep most of the things that we need in stock. We contacted them yesterday, I believe, for the fittings that we need. Generally, we use these, what they would term I believe they call these a female fitting, because it's a female nut with a male swage on the end of the line to take the O-ring. With female nut, we're actually needing some male threaded fittings for the ends of the hard lines on this car, which are the reverse of what we have in stock. We keep quite a lot of stock of these Flex fittings, but we need the reverse for the end fittings on the flexis that are going to go to these hard lines. And yeah, they've got nearly all of that stuff in stock. There's one fitting that's got to come from overseas. All the rest are in stock, so really good to deal with. And yeah, the flexible hoses we keep in stock here. Again, these are I believe these are all from Flex as well. We keep these in stock. They're the light wall type AC hose, which is looks a lot neater when it's installed. The heavy stuff just looks horrendous. This light series stuff just looks really neat, and the lengths of it are going to be very short. We swage that in-house. So yeah, really neat setup with the AC lines. So yeah, that's principally what Bobby's been doing. Rebuild the car, and then getting onto the AC lines. And then I think it's going to probably be Monday or Tuesday next week. we need to do some tie-ins together here. But I believe KS Composites have now made the moulds for all of the panels for the Allegros, including the doors. We need to get the doors back for this car. To do some for the other car, we need to get the doors back for the other car to do the modifications to them. But they've had the doors because of taking the moulds. They've actually taken the moulds from them, not from CAD on the doors, because the doors are standard effectively. So they're doing the carbon skins for those. They've taken the moulds from them. I believe I had an email earlier today which would suggest that the moulds are now made. I'm just trying to confirm that. If they are, then we'll be able to get the doors back, do the modifications to those, and it will also mean that the carbon parts shouldn't be too far behind on that. So that's exciting times. And the other thing, when we go and fetch that, we're also going to do a little tie-in with, we're doing a little exchange with Johnny Smith on a couple of interior parts, part of the dash. We're doing a little, Johnny Smith's Allegro has got a dash top that we need, and he wants the dash top from one of these, so we're doing a little swap with him as well. So we're going to sort that out as well while we're at it, and go and see Adam at Fabco, and go and have a little swap round and say hello to him as well. So yeah, that's another job for next week. So yeah, all coming along well on the Allegro front. As I say, the second Allegro, I will come over here and point at this as well. Tom is working on this. We've got a variety of metalwork to do on this. The driver's side floor, as we've said from the start, has somewhat perforated. It had a bit of a water leak into the footwell. It's rotted through the floor, thinned the metal right down. So Tom's just started on making up the repair sections for that. So he's made this section up, which is the inner section of the floor, the innermost nearest the centre tunnel, and then he's about to set to on making the main floor section. We'd weighed up various ways of doing it, but he's elected to chase all that over steel formers by hand rather than trying to do a big resin former. So that's his way forward. I think he's going to use the Pool Max to do the, well, it's not a Pool Max, but you know, the Pool Max type machine, Henry Pell's Nibbler. I think he's going to make the main swages in that, and then hand form the ends and hand shape the various junctions and things in those. It's quite a complicated piece to make though, so yeah, that's going to be progressing. And he's also done a repair in the boot floor. There was some rot around the drain bung in the centre of the boot floor as well, again from having water sat in it. It was perforated in there as well, so there's some work to do on that as well. But yeah, the final stages of metalwork that we can do without the panels, basically another maybe 2 to 3 days, and we'll be at the point where we can't do any more metalwork on either of these cars until we have the panels then. Hopefully the panels are about a week away. So yeah, I think that's about where we're at on those. Moving on from that, we'll go to body shop. And Mark has a set of panels set up in the booth for the Churchill Mark II Jag 2-door coupe. we're going to come in here. Mark's hiding the other side of this car, around here. And I'm actually going to hand over to Mark and let him explain what he's been up to on the Jag, because he can probably put it better than I can.
Hello everybody, I'm Mark from the Body Shop, also known as Retro Power Mark. This week we've got Churchill into epoxy finally. Still a long way to go yet. As like you've seen, like last week I had all the trims fitted for mock-up just to make sure with all like the extra, like the build we put on, like the polyester, just to make sure everything flows, fitted, just adjust a few things. Because obviously we've had to change some flows of the panels with filler, etc., because there's been that much custom work on it. So the next steps will be like probably prep the engine bay. I've got to prep the engine bay, get it sealed, and then I've got to get the car back onto the rotisserie, get it flipped over, sealer work, some little probably little dents here and there to just put a bit of filler in. And then we'll get the truck bed liner, Raptor, whatever you call it, want to call it. Then you'll probably see the colour eventually.
How long do you anticipate for that, roughly?
Well, I just want to get the panels into epoxy, then I'll get this back into the body shop, get it on the rotisserie. I've probably got a couple of days sealer work, little fettling. Then I want to get inside all keyed up, sealer worked. That's going to have the direct polyurethane direct in it, nice black satin, because most of it's going to be dynamatted. And then after all that's done, we'll get it back out, body shop, 320 dry sand, block it, and then it's wet flat 800, back into the booth, colour, clear, and then slug away with the polishing.
Is it quite a tricky car to replicate?
Yeah, it's obviously it's a curvy car. These cars are hard to do. We've done a couple now. We've got a blue standard one with touring car, bonnet and stuff, but that's been on hold. And we've done Utah, which was very hard. It's because a lot of curves. This one's had a lot of custom roof chop, like custom arches, rear quarters. It's been very hard. We've got the custom stuff put in at the front. It's a tricky car to do, but there's a little bit more dialing in to do. Like now you've got like this shiny finish on the epoxy. I can see like just little imperfections here and there. Like there's one here I need to sort out. There's a line up here I'm not quite happy with yet, but I can dial that in with the blocking maybe. And then yeah, it's been hard, but it's going to be worth it because it's going to be a stunning looking car.
So thanks, Mark, for that. That's explain what's cracking on that one. So we'll leave that now until next week. We'll see where we're at next week. Moving on from that, Gaz has been working on the Redux E30 BMW, which is progressing well. There's just as we mentioned last week, and it's the same again now. Only we're pretty close to full panel fit up. There's just sorting out little edges, details, some areas where when the panels are bonded they pull a little bit, some areas where the panels need slight adjustments on corners, titivations in various places to prepare the car for its polyester coat. This will be getting a polyester spray surfacer coat as the next sort of major operation. But it's one of the many panel and de-panel operations of the car is putting everything together, getting all the gaps exactly right. Yeah, the panels were assembled in metalwork, but they have to be assembled again prior to being bonded on, and then they really have to be assembled again to actually fine-tune the gaps, because the gaps all need to be sanded together on the car to get them absolutely exact. So yeah, Gaz is currently going through that stage of panels on, panels off, panels on, panels off. It's quite laborious, quite monotonous. Nobody's favourite job, because it's just lots of going round and round in circles trying to work out how to align everything and getting the alignments dead on. I think Steve was also working on this earlier in the week, getting the bumpers aligned and doing the initial prep on the bumpers and getting the bumper mounts bonded in. As you may recall from previous episodes, we've modified the way we were doing the bumper mounts entirely because we weren't. We decided that basically we needed to make the adjustability on them better. So we've improved the way the adjustability was done on the bumpers. So that was a slight change. That's been done. Steve's got those prepped, got the mounts attached. Steve's actually now moved back on to doing some wiring again at the moment. We'll pick up on that in a minute. I think that pretty much says where we're at in terms of fabrication shop, metal shop and body prep. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to myself over in the assembly shop, and we'll pick up a couple of things going on in there. And so, as if by magic, we are now upstairs in the CADDEN, and I thought we'll do a little pause up here to pick up on the key things that have been going on this week up here. It's been a bit of a sort of spread out week with things dotting around, but probably first, looking out of the window, is on the wiring front. Alex and Steve have been working on the Project 1 Escort engine loom. Alex has finished the design work on that, and Steve and got the rope laid out in the engine bay to work out all the wire routings and the wire lengths required, and then he's got that rope laid out onto the wiring table and got all the terminations catalogued and the wire designations made, and now Steve is getting all of that lot laid out onto the table, ready for its final termination. So that's progress occurring there, and then Alex is now on to the next design stage. Which stage are we on now?
I'm going to make a little jig for calibrating the fuel sender.
Ah, yes. Yes. I've forgotten about that little element. Yeah, it's one of the...
You can't get to the... you've got little micro switch buttons on the inside, which is where the tank is. You can't actually get your hands in to press them. So I'll make a little jig based off the design we've got for the fuel tank, and then multimeter and pressy buttons and flashy lights and all sorted.
And we have a calibration, and we know how much fuel we have. Hopefully we then don't need to readjust it once it's in the car. But yeah, no, that should be fine.
This to the tank, and then you've got to calibrate the gauge to this. So it's
we should be all right. We should be all right. One of the many complications of simply measuring how much fuel we have. We could just have a stick and dip it in, but we couldn't even do that because you can't get at it. But yeah, so that's that. And George is currently working on the E-type rear body section. I think we mentioned last week about a change of route, a change of plan on that, because of various other changes have led up to us now doing that in metal, doing that in steel. And to that end, we now need to make a book to make the steel rear end, and to that end George is now re-prepping the drawings and scan data from the rear end to enable him to do the drawings for the book, so that we can then cut all the parts of that on the new router, which we'll come to in just a sec. Also in here, if Invisible Luke was here, Luke's actually obviously downstairs currently scanning the Scimitar, but Luke's done a couple of bits up here this week as well on the Project Kuma Escort dash binnacle. Obviously the binnacle you've seen previously, the binnacle for the Project 1 Escort, but I think way back we'd have mentioned, but most people, including probably people here, will have forgotten that the seating positions between the two cars are noticeably different. The owners or the drivers of the two cars are different in the way they sit in the car, and consequently the dash and steering and pedal layouts are actually different between the two cars. There's quite a lot of changes, and that culminates in the instrument binnacle sitting at a different height relative to the metalwork, which means it needs to be a different shape. So the design, although the appearance will be the same, the actual design is different between the billet parts from one to the other, so that it actually fits the metalwork of the car. So Luke's been finalising that, and then as evidenced by the pieces of cardboard on his desk, he's done the primary initial outline CAD work for the projected plan for the Interceptor airbox. So that's all. That's what he's been working on as of yesterday. He's then onto getting the Scimitar sort of digitally captured before we hustle that back out of the way to make room for another project coming into the workshop. I think that pretty much sums up what's going on upstairs. So we now whiz on down, picking up where I mentioned the router with a view to cutting the parts for the rear of the E-Type. We'll whiz down there because the first part of the week we had, sorry, for the tail end of last week actually, just after the video was shot last week, we had a visit from Richard from Autodesk, who came and gave us a hand getting set up with our cam set up for driving our new router from Fusion 360, which went very successfully. It was a vertical learning curve of a day for us, but Richard did an admirable task in imparting a tiny fraction of his knowledge to us and enabling us to actually chop some pieces of wood on the router. So we'll wander down and have a quick look. So, teleported back downstairs as if by magic and into our little CNC router cell. As I say, I think I mentioned last week, we've got the wall saw sort of up and running as well now, so we can cut boards to size and cut our stock. We've cut our bits of stock, we've got the router up and running, that's all working, really happy with everything's gone there. And as I mentioned upstairs, Richard from Autodesk came and went through with us at the tail end of last week the CAM process. He's got us up and running with a post processor from Fusion 360 to the Mantec router, which is seems to be, as far as we've been able to determine so far, is working really, really well. And then we picked a fairly simple part to do some toolpaths on and just try programming. So we've got here's an example, the example part we made, which was a fairly simple piece. It's actually a piece that was in reality was made by 3D printing, but we decided it would be a good part to trial make in MDF, just as a part that would be quick to machine, relatively straightforward to model, but could still use 2 or 3 separate tools. In fact, I think we actually used all 4 tools that we had on the machine at the time. I think we used 4 tools on that. I think we've got a little screen grab video of that of the toolpath simulation. Once you program the toolpaths in Fusion 360, then we can simulate within Fusion just to check that everything's working correctly within the and that the G-code is all doing what it should be doing. Obviously, then the translation to the router then adds a stage of jeopardy to that, in that there are various other things going on. From what we can determine, that all works fine. But yeah, we used a facing tool, which is sort of at the far end of our tool changer. Used a 60mm carbide insert tipped face mill to just mill off the excess stock. Then we used 12mm 2-flute spiral cutter to do the initial roughing. Then we used a 6mm single flute solid carbide cutter to do the holes and do a little bit more roughing in a couple of spots where the rads weren't suited to the 12mm cutter. And then we used the cutter that's actually in the machine at the moment, which is a 1.6mm tip radius bore nose tapered cutter to do the finishing passes over it. And that's given us a pretty good finished part. So as a sort of first day of actually trying to do anything, going from a CAD model to that in probably under 6 hours, from knowing nothing to being at that stage in under 6 hours, I'd call that a pretty good learning curve. We're pretty pleased with that. We've had a couple of little ups and downs since, a couple of scratching heads on why things did or didn't work. We had a bit of the tool measuring. There's a few bits of basically there's a few bits of the controller on these routers is a Chinese make. I mean, they're Chinese made machines. They're sold in the UK and supported in the UK by Mantec, who I must emphasise have been very, very helpful to us. Despite this obviously being a second-hand machine, they've been very helpful. Anything I've asked them, they've been forthcoming with straight away. Their post-processor, no problem, give us that straight away. User manual for the machine, straight away. As soon as I can get them the serial number, user manual straight away. And a couple of things, probably the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that we've not got any light curtains on this machine at the minute, so you can actually walk into the operating area. It will have light curtains on it. I'm actually waiting for cables. We've got that overridden at the minute. I've only got 2 people really, or 3 people that were operating it. I'm happy that we've got safety procedures in place to make sure nobody's going to get minced. but there will be a light curtain on the machine as soon as I've got the cables for the light curtain. So that will be addressed, and that's another area where they've been very helpful in getting us the cables for the light curtains, because they'd been lost amongst with the first owner of this machine, who again has been very helpful but couldn't find the cables. So that's being addressed. But yeah, they're very, very helpful company. But in the background, it's a Chinese-made machine, Chinese spindle, Chinese-made machine, and a Chinese controller, which is a Weihong NK105 G3 controller. And obviously there's a number of aspects of the machine that that controller, well, it's in charge of many aspects of the machine, but we need to find out the nuances of that controller, and one of them is the automatic tool changer. And there was some not doubt, we were wondering whether everything would run smoothly in terms of the tool changer, because obviously the code coming from Fusion 360 will simply call for a tool. At that point, the controller has to do all that bit itself and simply select the tool and bring it back to the work area. That'll actually work perfectly well. Zero problems with that. The only issue we had, if I'm being totally honest, was a minor glitch where we used when we were with the tool measuring, when you load the automatic tool changer, you have to measure all the tools to work out all the various offsets. That's actually automated within the NK105 controller. However, there are two different keystrokes, both of which outwardly seem to call for the same measuring procedure, and a bit of a miscommunication and or misremembering of the instruction on that caused us to use one of the measuring procedures, which appears to do a tool measure but then doesn't save the tool offset. For some reason I don't quite know what the point of that procedure is, because it goes and uses the tool probe, drops the tool onto the tool probe, comes back as if it's done a measure, but doesn't actually do the measure, and then we got a slight accident with a tool offset. But anyway, no problems, no lasting damage to anything. The benefit of practicing on some MDF means we didn't destroy anything, so all was learnt well there. But yeah, really, really good first. We can't devote too much time to this because obviously this isn't earning money time, so we've got to be careful in balancing what we do in learning with what we do in actual paid hours. But we got enough time in on Monday and Tuesday this week, and just into Wednesday, for James, Jim, who will be in charge of driving this machine, and George, who will be in charge of generating the CAD that James has got to actually then make on this machine. We got enough time in to sort of strike while the learning iron was hot, and be able to remember, get the knowledge lodged in the brain. So that we've not forgotten everything by the time we actually do come to make a part. Now what my responsibility will be now is to make sure that we get some actual work onto this machine soon enough that knowledge stays lodged and we don't all forget what we've got to do before we get to that stage. So yes, very, very imminently we will have some parts that we'll be making on this machine, so we'll be able to see it in action. But yeah, really productive early parts of the week, going from never having done any CAM work at all in Fusion to making a part on a machine within 6 hours. I'd say that exceeded my expectations, and I really can't fail to be impressed by Fusion 360's CAM capabilities. It's just to somebody that hasn't experienced it, it's absolutely mind-blowing. So yeah, really, really impressed. It's just amazing how in my lifetime, from my years at college, which were mid-1990s, where we did CNC manual programming, to now doing the CAM within Fusion. It's just a whole different world. Really, really very impressive. So yeah, major strides forward for RetroPower there. I'll open the curtains for Jamie to try and get a camera through. A little bit tricky there, and we'll come through to the assembly workshop, and we're going to pause here by the Project Kuma Escort. That'll be the first little stop in here, and I've got to try and remember. This is where I'm going to forget lots of things, I'm afraid, but I'm going to try and remember everything that we've done. The first thing of note here is these rather lovely caps that we've got back for the dry sump tank and the two header tanks in the engine bay. That's the hydraulic system header tank, so that's got the brake and clutch hydraulic fluid in it. And this is the screen wash header tank, which then feeds the passenger footrest main tank, where the screen wash pump also lives. And Bruce has done his usual laser engraving for us on these, and a beautiful job again, getting the alignments The obvious and slightly tricky part of that process is that we want all of these caps, when tight, the engravings to all align in the engine bay. So he has a jig that he can then get the orientation of these caps correct in, so that when we know what angle they're at when they're tight, then he'll engrave them at the correct angle so that they all line up neatly. One of those minor details that when they all line up neatly when they're in the engine bay, and it's the details like that count for a lot. So yeah, we've got those back. And the ones for the other car, which I can't remember if they're fitted or not, but certainly for the Project One as well, we've got those back. Mentioned upstairs the dash. Luke has got the 3D printed version, the PLA 3D print of the dash binnacle in this car as well, just to check, just to do a trial fit on that, and that's all good. Further on this, we had a batch of Xylan coating back from East Midlands Coatings, who do our Xylan, which is basically PTFE coating, and a real nice little touch actually. I hadn't realised we were doing it, and it makes a massive difference. The Jubilee clips on this is just one of those little details that I really like. The Jubilee clips on the fuel filler hose. We've talked about the fuel filler hose before. Goodflex Rubber made those in FKM lined material for us, so no fuel permeation. But then the final really nice touch is that the stainless steel Jubilee clips that hold that on. I know you're thinking, why is he going on about Jubilee clips now? Well, we've had the Jubilee clips Xylan coated. And interestingly, the Xylan is a tough enough coating that it resists the action of the worm screw on the Jubilee clip engaging with the rack teeth on the Jubilee clip. The PTFE coating is plenty robust enough to not be removed by the action of doing the clip up. So the clips are plated in the, well, not plated, coated in the open state and then closed back up and put back together. And it means that there's a resilient coating on there that stops them being a shining silver part in an engine, in an area of the car where there aren't any other shiny silver parts. And it also actually makes the clips much easier to operate. They don't have that stainless steel on stainless steel graunching and pickup that they tend to normally have, which generally means you have to oil them to be able to use them properly without them seizing. So yeah, really nice touch that, having those Xylan coated. So yeah, that's I think that's pretty much where we're at on that. I can see in the background on Project One, I'm not going to go over there because they're busy over there at the moment, but they're fitting the heated screen to the Project One Escort at the moment, and also George has just done the final assembly, having got the final parts for the door handles back from the Xylan coating as well. That was also in the batch from the Xylan coaters from East Midlands Coatings. So he's got the door handles assembled for the Project One car and got the door handles fitted on that car as well, and they're looking really good. I know it's been a long story on the door handles, but actually got a door handle now on the car in its final state, finally assembled, fully operational. We got there in the end on that one. Quite a challenging task. So that's all done. I think that's where we are at on Escorts. We've done loom, we've done all those parts, so I think I've got all the parts there. Moving on from that, we'll whiz past more Redux parts. In parallel to the work going on the body shell, we've also got some other work going on the interior plastics. Adam Gibbo has been working on the interior fiberglass parts for the Redux car. The interior trim, most of the interior trim parts have been replaced in those cars with lightweight fiberglass parts, which are then trimmed mainly in leather, various things, but mainly leather. And all of those parts require trial fitting in the body shell before they can go for trimming, and they require various fasteners fitting. All of the fixtures and fittings to be able to use them require fitting, and various trimming, various clearancing operations and removal of parts. Just a lot of detail work required on those fiberglass parts before they can be fitted to the car. So without going into the detail on every part, Adam's been working on getting all of those parts prepared and ready to go to the trimmers, which I think he's pretty much done now. I think he's complete on that operation. So that's what Adam's been working on earlier this week. And moving on, Anthony's been working on the Camaro, and this is where I'm going to have a total brain melt, because he's been doing all sorts of small but rather important jobs. First of which was getting the bonnet fit improved. There's been some adjustment needed there, and getting the bonnet buffers fitted and using them to control the bonnet height, and there's been a bit of to and fro and getting all that to fit. He's then been fitting this centre panel in the engine bay and getting all of the pipe work correct and located properly and clipped and secured that has to hide underneath that panel. And there's been, again, a bit of fitting the panel, getting the pipe work secured and fitted out of the way, and then refitting the panel. So backwards and forwards operations on that. Inside the car, he's got the throttle pedal fitted. It's the GM drive-by-wire throttle pedal that GM supply, that Chevy Performance supply basically to go with their engine packages. So we're using that the throttle pedal that they supply. He's got that fitted in the car and finally bracketed up and located. He's got the seat bases and the front carpet. I think last week we got the rear carpet in. He's got the front carpet fitted, trimmed, trimmed back to fit properly, and because I think Cal may have mentioned it in a previous episode, the tunnel shape has been modified, not sufficiently that we can't use the carpet set, because it's actually an original. It's an aftermarket original carpet set. It was original to this car when it came to us, but it was brand new because the car had actually been restored, in inverted commas, when it came to us. So it did have a new carpet set in it. So we've fitted that carpet set, which cleaned up perfectly and was very nice. We were slightly concerned whether the floor pan mods would mean it didn't fit, but it did fit. It's absolutely fine. But Anthony's done some fine-tuned trimming of the edges to make sure it fits perfectly, which it now does. And then he's got the front seat bases fitted, and what else? Ah, yes, and then I think there'll be a number of other things which I'll have missed, but the other bit I will dwell on is he's also got the steel trims fitted around the internal roof frame, basically that fit across the top of the windscreen and around the rear window aperture that the headlining latches into. They require fitting before the headlining can be fitted, and he's got those in place now and tweaked, because there's various tweaking. They've been coated, they've been fitted now, so they're all in place. So yeah, that's all coming together pretty well. I'm bound to have missed a number of things in there, but my brain is at the limits of its ability to remember things now. So I think I've covered the bulk of things there. And as I say, I think I've covered the bits on the Mark 1 Escort, the screen fitting and the door handles and the caps. And obviously earlier in the week, as we covered on the router, James was busy with us doing sort of the learning process on that. So I think that pretty much sums up where we're at this week. I'm bound to have forgotten something. My apologies if I have. I'm sure Cal will pick it up next week if I have forgotten anything else. So I think on that note, we'll see you in a week's time.